So I've been a little nervous to review this trailer for Bahubali, a big Indian film that's coming out in July. Actually a two-parter, so the first part comes out in July. But I'm honored to say that I got a number of requests to review this trailer, and I also think it's a trailer worth our attention because it's yet another example of a foreign filmmaking industry outside of Hollywood making a big move for the global stage to make an impression there. This is the most expensive film apparently ever made in India. And India, of course, is a very prolific filmmaking community. So for them to step up their game in this way, I think shows that they have their eye on a much higher prize. And that's to go beyond Bollywood and to go into the global market. We discussed Attack on Titan from Japan. China's trying to very aggressively move into the global space, and so I think it's fascinating to see India also joining this race for global cinematic domination, or at least a piece of the pie. So I'm going to do a shot-by-shot review of this because it's a beautiful trailer, breathtaking, and also because it's not in English. So it's a little hard for me to understand what exactly is going on here. I did a little bit of research into Bahubali, who that figure is for Indian culture. I'm going to give you a quick description of what I discovered. Take it with a grain of salt again because I'm here in New York City, very far from India. So for those of you who are fans of Indian cinema or from India, and again those who asked me to review this, if you could also step in the comments and add any clarification as to the story behind this film, both in terms of what it's depicting and the anticipation for it in India, that would be greatly appreciated. Alright, so who is Bahubali? Which I'm probably mispronouncing. Well, according to my search on the internets, it is this religious figure in India who eventually came to represent nonviolence, but it doesn't seem very nonviolent in this first half of this two-part story, telling his origin. But it's a classic tale of a favored son, who was born into wealth and power, but decides to go a different route, a more inspiring route. Now I know there are also multiple religions in India, I believe, as there are anywhere, but there's not like a predominant religion, I don't believe, like there is to some degree in the United States. I don't know. You never know what the exact numbers are. But I'm curious as to the religious situation in India and how a film like this would do. Christian films have done quite well, here in the United States. Passion of the Christ, God's Not Dead on a much smaller scale, but still a successful film. And also we've had some successful, Christian-based television events. So it's kind of like, I guess, the same idea of tapping into that religious, audience, but they're just doing it in India. Although I wonder if they're limiting their audience in that same way. So kind of what you have here is like Gandhi meets Braveheart, but a lot of other influences that we'll touch on in the shot-by-shot review. But I think the bottom line is that this looks like a very strong contender out of India, and something that I hope will play, I'm sure will play, but gets a lot of people to give it a shot worldwide. For instance, I know that there used to be a theater in Midtown, New York that played exclusively Indian films from that region of the world, but they went out of business. But I do know that the AMC Empire 25 in Times Square plays quite a number of Indian films these days because people go and see them. For instance, PK was able to get into the top 10 when it debuted, I believe, earlier this year or last year here in the United States. Alright, so let's get started. Alright. Really a beautiful film. Alright, so there's the production company. Another one. Now right there, that looks really good. It has a little bit of like a painting backdrop effect to it a little bit. It actually reminds me of the Legend of Korra, right? And the Earth Kingdom to some degree with the walls separating the city. But it looks good, it looks believable, and I think it shows right off the bat that they've spent the money, but they've spent it in the right places, right? Sometimes people are like, why are budgets for movies so big? And it's like salaries. But here it looks like they have a really respectable visual effects budget and execution. All right, and it just looks cool. You're like, what's going on down there? All right, so coming in, also very Legend of Korra right there. Now we have some stuff here, people enslaved. Now this is some stuff when Bahubali is a child, obviously, getting yelled at by his mom, like everyone. But this is like a really beautiful period, in the trailer, and I'm sure in the film, kind of showing his idyllic childhood and upbringing, right? Like, this guy didn't have a care in the world. Look what was in his backyard. A gorgeous waterfall. All right, so, and I also appreciate, the nod to Indian culture here. I mean, I think that's really great, and I hope that this does a good job in teaching and illustrating Indian culture to those of us who aren't familiar with it. It has a little bit fairy tale elements too, which I think is really interesting, and especially now with live-action fairy tales being so popular. Just gorgeous cinematography. So they're the typical, he's grown up. Now that's stunning. Right? I mean, this is also kind of like a travel ad for India, right? You're like, wow, I would like to go there. I mean, it's beautiful with that waterfall in the background and then him freestyle climbing up the side of this cliff. Take that, Point Break remake. There he is again. That's just amazing. Beautiful stuff. Now, right there, this, aside from being really stunning, it also reminds me of like old, ancient Indian artwork, also Asian artwork. I'm a big fan, actually, of that kind of style of artistry. Like what you see on like not only like tapestries, but also vases and different types of pottery. Really stunning. I mean, when I was little, my mom owned a Chinese a lamp that had like a Chinese art pattern on it, and I could just stare at it 4 hours just imagining what was going on in that landscape. And I think you have a similar kind of situation here. I mean, just that tree jutting out of the rock there is it just captures your imagination. But with the veil on this woman that he's jumping towards, that not only has like a fairy tale kind of element to it, but it reminds me a lot of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Wonderful piece, very visual as well. An American-made film to some degree. Ang Lee, of course, is a foreign filmmaker, but working in the Hollywood system. But very, very impressive stuff. All right, so he doesn't make it, and that's the end of the movie now. All right, so really, so you've got a romance there, but then you see all is not good in the garden, and then this is when we get to like a tumultuous time that we're showing here. Now this is great. That's beautiful, right there. I love this little puff of red that comes out when it lands. It's obviously some kind of ceremonial thing because you can see right before it comes down, there's like a little pile, those little piles of sand. Very nice, well thought out ceremony, but it almost seems like blood, right? Which I'm sure maybe is the effect, like crushing his enemies, but I think it's very powerful and it looks great on screen. I love the city that they have, by the way. It looks really spectacular, and it's really nice to see. We've seen this kind of setting so often in films depicting ancient Egypt, and it's really nice to see the attention brought to the past, the history, the very rich history of India. All right, so moving on. All is not well anymore as he gets older. There's the empire that has risen. Looks pretty darn nice. Now this is where you start to get, it reminds me a little bit of Braveheart, people being abused. We see it again and again in history. And for some reason, the ruling parties never seem to understand. They're like, well, if history has shown us anything, it's as if we make it bad enough for a certain group of people, they will rise up when they have nothing left to lose, right? But yeah, we do it again and again. All right, so looks very good. That looks great. There's your, this is cool. By the way, this guy, there's your ruler who doesn't care about his people. All right, so I don't need to have this trailer be in English to know what I'm looking at in some cases, right? But this is great. I love this a lot. Right here, that bull, that obviously, I believe it's a CGI bull. I don't think bulls actually look like that. It looks very cool. This kind of fantasy fairy tale element also reminds me of The Fall, which, because it had also, I believe, a director of Middle Eastern heritage, also brought in some elements of that into the set design and storytelling of that story. If you haven't seen The Fall, it's by, I believe, Tarsem, who did The Immortals, right? And a couple of other movies, The Cell with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Lopez, but he's a very talented director, and The Fall is actually a pretty darn good movie. Maybe like a step before this movie. So moving along here, we got some slow-mo shots there, a la 300. So we have, this looks very, okay, now you see the religious stuff start to come in. So I'm curious, now right there, I'm curious how that's going to affect, again, the box office appeal of this film. But right here, this was the one, like, really overt piece of dialogue in the trailer, and it seemed dubbed over to me, right? Like, it seemed like they hadn't actually recorded the sound on set. Now, this is the most expensive movie ever made in India, but still, it doesn't even practically hold a candle to the budgets out of Hollywood. So perhaps in an effort to shoot the film with these amazing special effects, etc., they had to dub it over. Or maybe they dubbed these movies over in general. I do know it's going to be released in 2 languages, so I'm curious, those of you who are in India, watching Indian cinema, what's the case with dubbing versus non-dubbing in these movies? All right, so moving on here. Now this is where there's like a lot of fighting, where I'm like, oh, isn't he supposed to be a pacifist? But maybe this is him on the way to becoming a pacifist. But I love the armor. I think the armor looks amazing. It looks really cool. Again, it's familiar to foreign audiences. It's things we've seen before, but I like that they change it up with a very strong cultural aspects of India. A lot of, pride. We talk all the time about other cultures not being represented in Hollywood, so it's so great to see them doing it themselves, right? Well, if Hollywood isn't going to represent us, we'll just go and do it ourselves. We had great armies as well. Come look. And I'm like, that is impressive. So I like that quite a bit. I think the helmets look amazing. I love the statue in the background there. I think that looks fantastic, and I love the flames and on the pedestals. It just looks really good. All right, now, more slow motion. Now here we go. Now you have armies fighting each other. That's typical. Another thing that we're very used to, right? The guy on the battlefield you don't want to run into. You're like, okay, I'm going to work my way through the crowd this way. But he looks very badass. All right. Now there we go. Typical, right there. Seen it all the times, just in Lord of the Rings movies alone. The clashing of 2 forces, right? This is old school battles, obviously, where they go onto a giant field and they're like, all right, let's just ram into each other. It's like the worst way of fighting ever. It's like, again, very abusive to your soldiers, right? It's just like, I'm just going to throw literally people at each other, and whoever has the more people or the tougher people wins, but the casualties are just going to be absolutely devastating. So that's a whole different discussion, though, about old-time warfare and how I'm glad it's evolved. But I think that this looks really spectacular, and again, it has to, because we've seen it so many times in other movies, we've seen it in everything from Lord of the Rings to the Chronicles of Narnia, it needs to hold up in this film, and I think it does, at least here in the trailer. I mean, I buy that as your typical army clashing with army shot, right? And Game of Thrones is even kind of doing that these days. So visual effects are getting really, really good. All right, moving along. Now we get into a close-up. It's not just all CGI. We've got some real fighting going on here, and I think the costume design is excellent, because here you have, I believe that might be our hero. I can't see, it's not too close a shot, but it's really expertly shot in the way he stands out from all of the stuff going on around him. So it's a really good, not only is there good fight choreography here, but it's a really good example of using costume design to make sure that the attention for the audience is drawn to a certain place. But it looks great. It looks very cool. I love that he's swinging that mace. That looks very cool. I'm impressed that he can get enough room around. I guess people will make room when you start swinging that thing, but I think for it to have any impact, you have to get some momentum going, right? I'd be like, that's an awfully long chain for that Bahubali. I think that that's going to be pretty useless for you out there, unless you're just going to just say, hey, here, you catch this. But it seems effective here, because it's his movie. All right, so moving on. Very cool, a little bit, again, some fantasy mythological elements there. That typical, again, like you see it a lot, but it's got to be there if you're going to, I think, compete on this level. The pulling around, with the sword. But you have to say, in this actor's defense, he executes it quite well. The way they have also the speeding up and then slowing down of the camera, it's very well done. All right. Now, right there, again, he's like, I mean business. And, that's important. I think it's important. I'm talking a lot about referencing other movies. But that's not to say this isn't an original film. I think this is a film that's just trying to compete in an arena where people have certain standards and demands that need to be met. Audiences is what I mean. And I think this film is aware of that, which is very smart, but then again is adding a lot of, I think, national cultural flavor to it, which is new and which is fresh. And so I think that's always important. When you want to give somebody something new, first you want to comfort them and soothe them with something they're familiar with, and then bam, here's some new stuff. And they go, oh, I like that. That's great. All right. So, and I like how bloody his giant sword is there. That's very cool. It makes you feel really sad that Hollywood's thinking of doing an Arabian Nights film with a Caucasian protagonist when you see something this amazing, right? You're like, just make a great Arabian Nights movie. It can be done. All right, so I hope that countries like this are, like India, are able to pause it while I'm talking here. Like India are able to succeed because if Hollywood obviously isn't going to tell their, stories correctly or accurately or faithfully, they need to, obviously the country's going to have to do it themselves. All right, so that's very cool. Again, a battlefield shot. I hope, Indian films, there's a slow motion shot right there, very 300. It looks very cool. But I just want to take a moment to say here, there's a lot of fighting in this trailer. And I think that Indian films, again, I went to that theater, so I believe the film I saw was Kites. But they have weird pacing, choices that are made, which obviously please the Indian audience. But as an American moviegoer, it was very odd to watch. So I guess I fear a little bit, like, I don't know if anybody saw Mongol. Very, very good movie. But they never made the rest of the series. They were like, here's the first part of Mongol's life. And they got me emotionally invested in it. And I was like, what's going to happen to Mongol? And then they never made Mongol 2 or 3. I believe it was supposed to be a trilogy. So I really, I think you have to be really careful. I believe they already shot this. I think they began filming in 2013, so they've already made the 2-parter. But just be aware if you see Bahubali, and I think it looks like it's worth seeing, just be aware that the pacing, if you're not an Indian moviegoer, is going to be a little bit off and maybe seem a little bit drawn out. But just imagine it, I think at least it's going to be a visual feast, so you can enjoy that part of it. So I don't know if it warrants a 2-parter as a movie, but we'll see. All right, so then here comes up our gorgeous title. Again, very impressive, very, very commendable. It's on par with what Hollywood does, as it needs to be. I think, especially as you see Hollywood getting more aggressive in releasing their films, and also Hollywood getting more in terms of the superhero genre kind of content. I think that's another reason you're seeing other film industries decide they need to get into this business as well, because how else can they compete? They can build up their television industries like we're doing here in Hollywood, in the United States. But here we have this great shot of Bahubali coming out of the water as the sacred baby. I wonder who's pushing him out of there, but it looks very cool. Actually, a BTT viewer sent me, this was one of the original posters for the movie as well, but it's a great image, and I think it really plays into the religious aspects of the film. All right, hold on that baby for a while because the baby's special, and then you have the end credits there, and go see it. All right, so that's the trailer for Bahubali. Thank you for watching it with me. Again, thank you everyone who saw this and thought of me and asked me to cover it. I hope you think I did it justice with my review. I'm very excited to continue this conversation down below in the comments. Very curious to hear what those of you in India and those of you familiar with Indian filmmaking have to add to the conversation. And I'm curious, if you are not someone who usually watches Indian films, does this look like something you'd want to watch? Do you believe that these other film industries like India and China, etc., can compete in the global market a la Hollywood? Do you think that can happen? I think it's already starting to happen, but until movies like this play in most multiplexes, because they're getting crossover from all kinds of demographics and not just, playing in a few theaters to meet the demand from the original demographic, then they won't have broken through. But I think we're getting awfully close. I think in the next couple of years, a film will break through and be potentially a big hit here in the United States. I'm not talking like Instructions Not Included, etc., those kind of movies. That made like 44 million. But I'm talking about something that'll be a big hit here as well as in its native country. All right, thank you so much, and you can check out some other episodes right now.